Okay, so these are my financial disclosures, mainly NIH, recently Mars Incorporated, and none of their funding influences anything I'll talk about today. So on the left side of the screen, what you'll see is a traditional diagnostic and statistical manual symptoms of ADHD. So not everybody has all these symptoms. Typically is divided into the inattentive type or the hyperactive impulsive, or what we call the combined type. And the inattentive type is much more common as you mature, whereas the hyperactive impulsive is really relevant to preschoolers, and combined type is really common from, I'd say, school age through at least adolescence and sometimes earlier adulthood, but we definitely see it in adulthood as well. What you see on the right side are some of the behavioral outcomes. Now, not everybody is going to have all those outcomes. That's just some of the common outcomes. I can tell you the number one reason why we see people in our clinics is because of educational problems. So their children are having difficulty with their schoolwork. If they're college students, it's the same situation. But we also see we see a lot of stigmatization about ADHD. It's been really interesting over the years how it's really changed in the community. It's just changed because I think of social media in so many different ways, and I'm not going to really go into that whole aspect of it at this point, but it definitely has changed. Also, we're finding irritability is particularly common in girls, not as much in boys, but especially the teenage girls. We're finding that in our research. And unfortunately, there seems to be a higher sensitivity and vulnerability for substance use. Again, none of these are true of everybody. And accident rates are much higher. So that's automobile accidents as well as household accidents. Now, I did forget to say, also in terms of the language I'm using language that's person-centered as well as identity-centered, depending upon which study I'm talking about. So forgive me if I misspeak at some point, but we're trying to be as inclusive as possible, and what I've typically done in the past is ask the community how they want to be represented. And I'm also coming from the perspective of particularly the ADHD. I have family members with ADHD. I have lots of colleagues with ADHD. I have trainees with ADHD, but I'm also an active clinician, and almost every research project that I've undertaken has really been influenced by some of my personal observations, particularly in some of our quasi-laboratory studies, like some of our classroom studies, but also from my clinic and parents telling me their stories and adults telling me about their challenges. And that's made me think about what paradigms we use in the context. So this study probably is not much of a surprise to anybody. This is from the Center for Disease Control. We've seen a huge increase in diagnosis in children, but it's leveled off in about 2022, 2023, but over 1 million children more were diagnosed between 2016 and 2022. So quite an increase. But the largest increase is really in adults, and particularly in adult women. That's where we really see this dramatic increase. And a lot of this occurred around the COVID time. And at that point, a lot of adults will tell you they had a very hard time getting their prescriptions filled. I think that has eased a little bit, and I think probably the companies who manufacture the medication were able to increase the amount. But I think really since COVID and TikTok, we're hearing a lot more about ADHD. Now, in terms of the treatment landscape, it really varies, but we can say overall about 1/3 of kids with ADHD are not getting adequate treatment. Treatment typically involves behavioral treatment, parent training. There's some really awesome school interventions as well, and medication, but about at least 1/3 of kids are not getting the combination that we really expect to bring the best outcomes. So that is definitely a problem. You'll see at the bottom, there's actually been an increase though in one study showing that they're able to access more behavioral treatments. And I really think that is because COVID, because the advent of Zoom, online access and so forth. And we're so much better able to reach people in areas where they're these deserts where they didn't have access to resources. And it's been, so CHAD is one of the groups we've worked with a lot in the past, and they have really fantastic resources and support groups. And most of their meetings are online now. And so people can access those as well. Now you can see from this figure right here that if somebody has ADHD, there's a really good chance that they also have another disorder or challenge. And so as clinicians And teachers and parents, we really need to think about if we're looking at ADHD, we probably need to be assessing for other challenges as well. The younger group have the most with the behavioral disorders, so that's like the oppositional defiant disorder, and they may have conduct disorder. That's the 44% blue line. But anxiety disorders are also very, very common, so those also need to be assessed. And what we see as people develop, you tend to see more and more of this comorbidity. Learning disorders, we've always recognized as being high in ADHD. So that could be dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia. So keep that in mind, because that can also very much influence one's ability in the classroom. So this is from a study we just published within the past few weeks. This is from the Charge and the Recharge study. So Irva Hertz-Pachotto directed this and continues to direct it for many years, and I work on it in collaboration with Rebecca, as well as Debbie Bennett. And this was a study where we looked at kids who were brought in between 2 to 5 years of age, and we brought them back between 8 to 20 years of age. And we looked at whether or not they had ADHD, but not just ADHD, whether they had particular subtype of ADHD. And there were 4 primary groups when they were originally brought into the study. On the left, you can see this is the autistic group, and then we have a developmentally disabled group. So these are kids with developmental disability without autism. So Down syndrome is one example. And then OEC is their other early concerns. And these are children who were initially brought in, and there was some thought that there was an autism diagnosis, but based on our in-depth evaluation, they did not meet criteria for autism. And then this group is really a general population group. And so what the blue bar shows is whether or not they didn't meet any criteria for any ADHD diagnosis when they were brought back when they were older. So the vast majority do not. But if they're in the autism or DD group or other early concerns, they have anywhere from a 3 to 4 times more likelihood of having qualifying for an ADHD diagnosis. The red bars indicate if it's combined type of ADHD, so that's where they have the inattentive, hyperactive, and the impulsive symptoms. So we see the autism and the DD groups tend to have more of that. Where we see other early concerns is they have much more of the inattentive type, and same for the general population group. So perhaps these children, when they initially came in when they were younger, it may have looked like autism, but it may have really been ADHD symptoms. The hyperactive impulsive alone diagnosis is very rare. We typically see those in preschoolers in the general population, but we actually saw some children, a small group, who also have that in the autism and a little bit in the DD group. This is important because there are treatments being developed for subtypes of ADHD. So if we can get to the point where we can actually diagnose according to subtypes, we might have more powerful treatments to help these children. But for a long time, one could not diagnose ADHD within autism. That was not allowed by the DSM. It was really just the past several years we've been permitted to do that. And now we're trying to catch up by having improved diagnostic measures, because we're still working on it. In some situations, it can be quite challenging to make that diagnosis. So shifting gears here, this is just, put this slide in because I think it just really points to the importance of ADHD, because sometimes people can minimize the impact of ADHD, but this was an alarming study that came out of the United Kingdom last year, and it's looking at adults who had been diagnosed with ADHD, and you can see for men, their lifespan is 6.78 years lower. For women, it's almost, it's about 8.5 years lower. So we don't necessarily think it's directly the ADHD, but it's the associated issues that they have, such as accidents. We see a higher rate of suicides, particularly in women with ADHD, and some other comorbid challenges. So to me, this is a really compelling slide. That means we really need to think seriously about ADHD, how we're screening for it, and also about making sure that we have treatments that reach people who need it. Now I'm going to shift gears again. I'm going to talk about some of our research. And we're really interested in our lab to do research that's very contextually relevant, that represents what sort of situations people experience in real life. And one of the projects we've been working on for several years now is how we diagnose distractibility specifically within ADHD, or just distractibility in general, because all of us, since the advent of the cell phone, are more distractible. If you're not more distractible and you're in the audience, you are rare. Most of us have a hard time. We get alerts, constantly, whether it's mostly on our cell phone, but certainly even on our computers and so forth. And we just thought we really wanted to find better ways to measure distractibility within ADHD, but just also in our general population of kids. And we're particularly interested in the school setting because, again, this is where oftentimes we see the challenges. So on the left side, you can see here what the traditional ways of measuring distractibility are. This is a parent filling out a rating scale in a waiting room. This is oftentimes how it's done. And rating scales are valuable, there's no question about it, but there's also limitations. They can have recency effects in terms of the last experience they had with the child. They don't really break down contextually what's happening in terms of attention. The other way of measuring attention is using continuous performance tests or computer measures, and those can be highly precise, but they're very limited, and they don't really reflect the real world oftentimes. So like the example here, you press the button for go if you see a square versus if you see a round, if you see a circle, you would hold a response. And we felt like that doesn't really capture what happens to a child in a classroom. It doesn't really encapsulate what happens when somebody else is talking near them, when there's something else happening outside, a school bus going by, people talking outside the window, or mind wandering. So we wanted to see if we could improve upon that, and this is one from our most recent projects. And so this is built on years in our work with our virtual reality, and Patrick is here to attest. This has not been an easy project. We've had evolution over the years because they keep updating the software, but we've made some really good progress. And I only have 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to say really quickly, we're using this technology. It's helping us get much more refined measures. We're using eye tracking. We're using performance on academic tasks, and we're looking at what happens over time in a way that just cannot be captured by rating scales or computer tasks. And just real quickly, in terms of some of our other work, we've been doing a lot of work in fidgeting over the years. Hyperactivity has been is the most observable characteristic of ADHD, but many researchers haven't studied it. We long ago, and some of our colleagues saw that it seemed like when kids were moving more, they were actually doing better. So we tested that in the lab, and I'm showing this New York Times article because we got a ton of press from the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington, all over the world we got press about this. But we are not responsible for the development of the fidget spinner. We've been criticized about that, but we looked at natural fidgeting with arthrographs on the leg and the wrist. And what we show overall is that when there's more intense fidgeting, kids with ADHD are actually seeming to be doing better. We followed this up with adults with ADHD. Again, we saw fidgeting was associated with better performance. And the take-home message for me is that hyperactivity is not a bad thing. It used to be, I would see parents all the time trying to tell their parents to sit still and be quiet, and I can understand in certain contexts that's important, but also people have to understand it's not under their control, the hyperactivity. And find ways to have them naturally express that. So exercise, there's lots of good evidence for exercise. We've been looking at fidget tools. The data are suggesting that it might not always be as helpful as we'd like. It's really that sort of intrinsic movement that we think is probably most helpful. And we're trying to explore that right now in our lab. This is a really exciting clinical trial I'm involved in. It's funded by an SBIR grant through NIMH with my colleagues Jeff Nyquist and Duye Tadden. And Jeff Nyquist owns a company called Neurotrainer. And it's really cool because what it does, it integrates cognitive training with physical movement. So kids are using a virtual reality headset, they're doing it at their school, and they're acting out their attention training. And so they combines the best of both worlds. We've tested over 100 children. It's taking place in 3 schools in the Midwest, and we're crunching the data right now, and we'll see what happens. But this has the potential to reach a lot of people. Because it's already commercially available, and a lot of school athletes, not just school athletes, a lot of the pro teams, the baseball teams have been using it for years. So it's a cool kind of intervention that kids like. So we'll see what the data show though. This is a little bit, our workshop this afternoon is about how we've modified our the HOPS training group for addressing and improving executive skill functioning in ADHD. This is part of a meta-analysis that our team was part of, looking at parent training, which is, as I said, very common in terms of interventions. And the take-home message for this is that it's really focusing on reducing negativity and building affection. If you have to really focus on a small area, that seemed to be that made the difference in terms of improving functioning for these kids. If you can improve positive behavior in parenting, that should naturally reduce the negative. But if you're seeing parents who are doing a lot of yelling and inconsistency in how they apply their interventions and their rules with their children, that's an area to focus on. And it was most strongest in those families who have the most non-constructive parenting. And these are our resources that we have, and I think they are in the Padlet. And this is just some of the many amazing collaborators that I have and team members. Many of them have gone on, many of our trainees, but it really does take a village, and I'm really grateful to have such an incredible team that make me look good by producing this kind of data to present to you. And thank you for having me.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was founded in 1998 with the promise to reduce and prevent the disabilities that can be associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Every day, our clinicians and researchers make progress on that promise. Our groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other conditions associated with disability are helping affected individuals achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website or our social media platforms to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.